Hey guys, this is Chris from DS6 Machina, and in this series we're going to be going through the Kickstarter of Affinity, specifically the one volume known as Paradise. Now, unlike perhaps other Kickstarters, the vast majority of the writing of Affinity is finished, although I'd like to add more and expand on certain elements. This Kickstarter is designed to increase the quality and to get a full color version made. But what I'm going to show you guys here is a preview of the monochrome version, which is lacking the any artwork. So I'm just telling you what's going to be found in the book if it just funds. Hopefully, once again, we'll get a lot more content. But this will give you an idea of what to expect mechanically and narratively in the game. So we're just going to skip past the introduction here. And one thing about Affinity, we've mentioned numerous times that Affinity is includes three different settings that are thematically connected and connected in other very specific ways narratively. This might result in the conclusion that there's stuff copy and pasted between three books, and that's not exactly true. The only thing that's ever copy and pasted is actually this little section right here that just details the three settings and so forth. That's it. There's also one monster that's duplicated, but that's more of a narrative reason more than anything else. So everything else is completely original. The only other thing you'll also notice that you'll see thematically connected or arguably proper names, and we'll go into that in a second. So this first section just gives you a general overview of the setting. All of these books have this, and we'll go over the other two books as well. You'll see a lot of narrative segments. There's a large narrative story that connects all three stories. It takes up a large portion of book, not the majority. It's a couple thousand words, but you'll see that prologuing every chapter. This once again goes over the broad strokes of the setting. We're going to skip a couple pages to go to chapter 2. Now, Paradise has one of the largest fluff sections. It's got one of the largest setting backgrounds of the three settings. It has the largest. This is because this is a fantasy setting, but it's also a political fantasy setting. So we go into the history of all the kingdoms and their interrelationships. This is a much larger portion than the other two. It should be noted that all three games are about the same page count, plus or minus 5 or 10. That may change depending on the stretch goals, which means that Paradise has the fewest mechanical additions, while the other ones have more mechanical additions. This is not a weakness, this is just a difference, and that's still being said. Half the book is still basically mechanical. And we've said that Paradise is a full-scale orrery, which means it's a model solar system with planets connected to each other. It's a geocentric solar system, so there's a primary planet in the center called Bythos, and then smaller planets that orbit around it, and the sun is called Uno, orbits around it, and it's a smaller little orb. So we go into details with this chapter on the large-scale version, and we're going to skip about 12 pages onto chapter 3. This is the big chapter. This is the reason why this setting is so much larger than the other ones. This goes into the individual kingdoms, their relationships, and the small houses. This is just fleshing out the setting. What I was talking about the connections between the stories, you'll notice when you read the other ones that most proper names between the books are duplicated. So if you see something called Orago in Paradise, there's going to be an Orago in Taurus and an Orago in Conestoga. Now, in the case of these 12 kingdoms, there's 12 geodesic domes that have human colonies in Conestoga, and there are 12 city-states in Taurus. So that's another common thread, and the relationships are thematically connected. For example, Corvos has an alliance with Volani in all three empires, in all three books. But the actual specific stories are very, very, very different. But once again, that's more of this connecting threads between these stories while also maintaining their own originality. This is a very, very big chapter, so we're going to skip all the way to chapter 6, page 62, which is when we start going into the mechanics of the game. Every game of Affinity offers new races, anywhere from 3 to 4, hopefully more. Actually, I think they're all 2 to 3, and I think I want to get to 4. And with this book here, we have the Aegis, which are these godlike beings that are the only ones allowed to operate technology. So part of their racial abilities is to give them the capacity of owning technology. One of the things you guys get, you get these little powered armor as part of your race selection, and there are 3 sub races: the Shepherd, the Envoy, and the Taurus Knight. This is a section for the daemons. The daemons are they are not 100% fleshed out yet, because we may because I want to get that as a stretch goal, so hopefully we will be able to unlock them. And they're basically beings of light wrapped in kind of human skin. They're kind of hiding in plain sight. And then we also have various human uniforms. This is a way for people to be able to play elves and dwarves without actually having elves and dwarves. They're human uniforms. And then finally we have the Gamgee, which are purely alien. They are not connected to humanity. They're not magical. They are just an alien species that are residing within this shell. Going on to the next chapter, Existence. This is more of a little bit more fluff, but it goes into some details of the setting, languages, and the religious element, because there's a theocracy within this setting, and so it's a huge element of the setting called the Ascension. And this is also a section that has all the backgrounds. We have a bunch of backgrounds, and these backgrounds are built the same way I build backgrounds in Ultramodern, which means there's not a bunch of different graphs. There's one table that gives you a bunch of examples of backstories. Skipping 2 pages. Now you'll notice these page numbers are way off. Don't worry about that, because I keep on adding more sections, so the page counts will fix themselves once we go into it. So even though this says 54, I'm actually on page 96. Words is the element of magic. Now the big mechanical addition that we've added to Paradise is that the magic system within the game is based off of words, written words specifically. Amethyst Amethyst didn't change magic too much, except it said that everything had to be vocal. So everything had to be spoken. In here, everything has to be written down. There's no somatic, no vocal components. You literally write a script on a piece of paper, and that becomes magical. And then to apply that magic, you have to apply that onto a proper object for that thing to become magical. The idea being is that this is an enclosed universe. It's cased in a shell. It's a spherical, contained universe, and it has its own reality. And there's potentially a language that is the source code of this universe, and you're basically punching in a cheat code, which is something I've said similar in Amethyst. Amethyst is a similar type of justification. But here you actually have to write the words down on a piece of paper, and this is kind of how the magic works, are these written words, and they don't have magic unless you've actually put these words on something. As a result, the magic here costs money, because the ink is very expensive, the paper is very expensive. So the Cryptian magic involves having an album. So you don't have a spell book, you have an album, and you have these papers, these pre-etched papers in them, and the album is magical, so it prevents the papers from disintegrating. Then you open your book, you take out the piece of paper, you throw it on something, you cast a spell, which means that the Abacadarian, which is the magician class in this game, doesn't have a lot of offensive capabilities. He doesn't have a readily available fireball. He's great with traps, and he has a bunch of stuff that allows him to animate, and that's his big maison d'entrée. His primary purpose is to being able to imbue artificial life in things, and so he has a bunch of animate spells that allows him to have creatures. Now, the problem is, of course, is that they have a lifespan, so you can't have a permanent animated dog statue with you all the time. You have to cast a spell repeatedly. There is a subclass in the Abacadarian that allows you to gain more life out of these things, which of course means having the ability to imbue life into a golem. Now, golems are never fully detailed on how to create them in 5th edition. There's some unofficial rules, but most of the time it's a secret thing. A player is not expected to have a golem because, in their opinion, it may be game breaking or what have you. And here we are hoping on going into a lot more detail on golems. Right now, we just are dealing with the traditional 5e golems, but I want to expand on that heavily. But when you go through, these are all the spells. Some of them obviously will be very familiar, because you can't have a bunch of new spells without replicating spells from the from 5th edition. But we have a bunch of new ones too as well. a lot. We've expanded the animate objects section, but as we go into the next section here, we'll see a bunch of these golem spells. And these golem spells, there's a bunch of them now. So now you're actually spending money for a 5-minute cast to basically animate a golem. And so it's implied that until you do that, this statue is basically, it's just a statue. And it also implies that maybe a really powerful wizard will have a gallery of many such statues, and they're all able of being animated until he slaps a paper on them. So he can only maintain 2 or 3 of them at a time, but he may have a variety of different creatures he wants to animate at a time. So this is something we can play with, but it's a neat idea. So the flesh golems, you do have to create the golems. The golems are a bit cheaper than I think some of the unofficial rules play with, but I want to expand that heavily. That's one of the stretch goals is expanding the golem rules here. But yeah, you'll see a bunch of stone golem, clay golems. There's actually different levels of those. And the other thing, of course, dealing with these words, we have a new magic system called branding. Branding quite literally involves burning these sigils, the same sigils as these spells, onto someone's skin. When you do that, you impose a sacrifice, you lose something, but you gain something in return. Now, the advantage of a brand is that it's not taking up a space. It's not a headband, it's not a ring, it's not an armor, but you can only have a brand per section, same as before. And more importantly, you lose something in return. You sacrifice something, right? Like this one here, for example, although you fall at normal speed, you suffer no damage from the impact, but you reduce your maximum hit point value by 1. It can also cost 5,000, and then it's located on the torso. So you have a sacrifice, and the sacrifices get larger as the effects become better, right? So this one here, for example, your maximum hit points are reduced by 5, and your intelligence increases to 2. Stuff like that. There's a whole bunch to go through, so we're going to skip right past to Relics, which is page 126. This is the magical section. This is another section I want to expand greatly. We do have some artifacts. They're called the Honors of Kings. They're all in possession of the kingdoms, so these will never be items that the players would use. Maybe these would be items the characters have to seek out, or maybe steal. But generally, this is not something that they can walk around because they look like regalia. There are magic items, but because this is a theocracy within this setting, magic items are prohibited to be used by regular people, so you can't flaunt them. And they call these magic items vestiges. They're basically errant and unwanted portions of society. So the Ascension created this group called the Crypt of Altar, and they basically go out and they find magic items and they bring them, and since most of these can't be destroyed, they store them in this crypt. This is very much inspired by the SCP Foundation, except this is a fantasy version of the SCP Foundation. There's different classes of magic items, so you can include your own magic items from DMG or your own book, but we are including a bunch of our own. I want to expand this list heavily, which is something that's a stretch goal, but we have a bunch of new magic items I want to play with and add in, and some of them are certainly inspired by some fantasy films and so forth, but we wanted to play with a bunch of magic items, and we'll skip that because there's a lot of them. This Plex Codex is also mentioned in all 3 books, but their history is different because this tells you the history of the Plex Codex. This is another narrative piece, and to fully understand how the Plex Codex works into the setting is to read all 3 books. This is the reason why I feel that the books are really mostly valued as a single. So even though we're offering a Kickstarter option for single books and single PDFs, I truly believe that this is only a valued system if you get all 3. If you want the narrative experience. If you just want the rules and you want the rules of the written magic system, yeah, then go get Paradise. But if you want to understand how the settings relate to each other narratively, obviously you should get all 3. Shapers are they're a techno semi-magical item that's very unique to this setting. They're, to be honest, very much inspired by the balls from the horror film Phantasm, so I'm not really going to hide that fact, but I like the idea of them. So there's actually a whole bunch of different shapers. They're not evil unless they're operated by evil, but they're almost like a very unique type of familiar, and one of them even gives you the capability of being a magic user. So we'll skip past, we have a bunch of those, we'll skip past that and go into Forbidden, which is the tech section. Now, this has the smallest tech chapter because Paradise has the smallest tech aspect. Paradise is about 80% magic, 20% tech, and the other ones have a much larger ratio. With Taurus, it's 50-50, and Conestoga is 80-20, the opposite. So it's 80% technology, 20% magic. So this one are all technology operated by the Aegis. Their Aegis technology are designed to simulate magic without appearing magical because they are very much technological. So we have a bunch of new energy weapons, a bunch of very unusual melee weapons, which are once again, they appear magical but they're not. And then of course we have powered armor, and the Aegis power armor are very weird, especially their exo armor, because they basically don't look like powered armor. They look like force fields that are made to look like animals, and we'll go into more details, but they're very unusual in that capacity. And we'll skip past, and there's also some vehicles as well. Some of their high-tech vehicles are here, and these ground vehicles are just normal analog non-magical vehicles. Finally, we'll going into monsters. We're by page 166 now. Once again, there's only one monster that's replicated. Paradise monsters are kind of... There's obviously the Aegis and Ascension all have monster stats because they are an opponent force, so they're all presented here. And then we also have the Beasts of Paradise. Now, we go into details on how beasts work, and some of the guides of which ones you'll find. There are massive creatures within this setting, very much inspired by Shadow of the Colossus. The idea that there are these massive beasts. We'll see them later. They're called Watchers, but they're these singular massive monsters. Like they're the sizes of several city blocks. They would put a Tarrasque to shame, and we'll see them at, near the end. We'll skip past a few of these, and we'll get to Virus. Now, Virus is a common threat facing all three settings. They're not duplicated, mind you. So there is a Virus in Taurus and Conestoga, but they will not have the same stats. So the Duster, the Tempest, and the Cyclone are unique to this setting, but Virus does make an appearance in the other two settings, but there'll be 3 other monster stats. So in total, there's 9 Virus monsters. It's a very unique menace. Once again, there's a narrative reason why this is happening, but you kind of have to read the books to understand that connection. The Watchers are these gigantic monsters. They're titanic. They're huge. Challenge rating 30 creatures. They're not really meant to be attacked. We're including their stats because people like seeing the stats. But most of these creatures are not things that people should be able to fight. But they might be involved in an encounter. So we have a whole bunch of these things. And I want to add some more monsters. Thinner is the creature that is duplicated exactly the same, although his history is going to be a little different. The stats are exactly the same. And then once again, there's a narrative reason for that. So in total, when it actually comes to copy-pasted content, it's effectively 2 pages between these 200-plus page books. And then every single section ends with basically a narrative segment which concludes the story. So this one's currently at 210 pages. As you can see, there's no artwork. Depending on what we unlock, this game could go to 230 pages easily, if not more. So that is Paradise, the monochrome edition, showing you the content that we currently have offered, with more to come hopefully, but you can see some of the things we're going to happen. There's other videos based on Conestoga and Taurus, so check those out as well. And this has been Chris from Deus Ex Machina.